wired for sound, man. Waiver wire is looking pretty bleak, but interesting, right? Bleak but interesting is the assessment of the overall waiver wire this week. Some under-the-radar players that I think are very interesting, players that we have conviction in, that I maintain conviction in, and this is a strong week for wide receivers. There's a lot of good quality wide receivers out there. There's some interesting developments in the wide receiver cores around the league that we're going to get into. First things first, running back, right? Running back. Running back's where we start. Every waiver wire conversation that you should ever have needs to start with what running backs are available. This is particular interest to us because we start our actual fantasy drafts with wide receivers. So we stack up the wide receivers, so we don't need to tap the waiver wire much for wide receiver help around these parts, right? Around these parts, we don't do much shopping around for the wide receivers. So wide receivers can't help us really much at all because, see, we've got stud wide receivers up and down the road. Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs. A lot of great wide receivers. You know, Jamar Chase starting to round into form. Chris Olave. You know the players, right? That's the core of our fantasy teams. But that also means that we are going, the whole zero RB premise is predicated on tapping the waiver wire for running backs. And that's not just like for a league winner or what looked like a league winner before the high ankle sprain to Jerome Ford, but also just get you from 1 week to the next, get you those 10 to 15 fantasy points from 1 week to the next. You could typically find a running back that you can have some confidence they're going to give you some adequate replacement level points week in, week out on the waiver wire. You don't have that kind of confidence in the waiver wire when you're picking up wide receivers, and you shouldn't have to play that game. That's a losing game. Streaming wide receivers is a losing game. Streaming running backs is a winning game. That's part of the thesis behind zero RB. And then we look up, and what do we have this week? Emari Demarcado. It's like a flashback. I can't, like, it's like, did we not have this conversation 2 weeks ago? Yeah, we did. We had this conversation 2 weeks ago, and then the Cardinals, they got Keontae Ingram back, and they said, you know what? We kind of like this Keontae Ingram guy. He was the established number 2 behind James Conner. We can't let an injury rob a guy of a role. That's not fair. Though, when you watch the game, Emari Demarcado looks better. That was the whole thing. I say, hey, Emari Demarcado has like an 83rd percentile speed score on playerprofiler.com, and he's got great size-adjusted agility. This guy would have been more productive in college had he not been competing for touches with Zach Evans, who was an overrated recruit, and then a quality running back in Kendre Miller. Already this year, he has over 100 rushing yards. Already this year, he has 11 receptions out of the backfield. And then what we saw in week 7, 80% snap share. They turned the backfield over to him. What was interesting was even though he had fewer touches than Keontae Ingram the previous week, he actually outsnapped Ingram. So he's been the snap leader. He's been the number 1. If you're just setting your depth chart based on who's getting the snaps, it's Demarcado the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Now, James Conner is on IR with some kind of speculative MCL injury. Arizona Cardinals are super secretive with injuries because they're such a great team. They need this every little edge because they're trying to win every game, right? They're trying to take down the NFC West. This is an elite franchise, and part of the reason why they're elite is they're leveraging every potential edge they could get, and all the way down to the level of secrecy around these injuries. Good for the Cardinals. Yeah, it's really going to help them win a championship this year. not disclosing what happened to James Conner, right? Thanks, guys. Thanks. Yeah, you're really helping your cause. Great job. Great tactics, Arizona. Guy goes to IR. Think about Jeff Wilson. Oh, the assumption is, they open up the practice window. He comes back on time. That's the operating assumption by so many. And I'm like, not so fast. That's why we have Demarcado number 1, because he's got 2 weeks to go before James Conner is even eligible to return. And then we don't know. We don't know the severity of the MCL sprain, if it's even an MCL sprain, which is just speculative at this time. So I believe it is, and serious MCL sprains can cost a guy 6 weeks. So this is good news. This is good news. Now, it's the Ravens, but it is a home game week 8 against the Ravens. So this is a desperation flex option at home against the Ravens. They're not going to score a lot of points, but 80% snap share is what you were getting with James Conner. So I'm expecting James Conner level production from Demarcado, who's more explosive than James Conner for the next 2 to 4 weeks. So you need to have a pretty impressive option to offset and displace Demarcado from your flex spot, right? So let's say, for example, that Donta Foreman is going to play again, right? Let's say that somehow Roschon Johnson's out again, right? Which would just be heartbreaking. That means it's an incredibly serious concussion if that happens. Well, then you'd start Donta Foreman, right? Even though it's on the road against the Chargers. So there's a lot of options, right? That you could any quality running back that you can count on, like Kareem Hunt at Seattle, right? This is a team that just put up close to 40 points, the Browns. Kareem Hunt's now the number 1, like the de facto number 1, even though he looks like dust. And we'll get into other running backs on that roster in a minute, but those are the types of running backs where, okay, you're going to start those guys over Demarcado. Great. Okay, you know that. Fine. Right? But then the next level down, like any fringe running back that you're considering, I would play Demarcado over those guys. And that also goes for the other running back that everyone's trying to pick up off the waiver wire this week, which is Darrell Henderson. Now, if you were smart and you were listening to our starter stream show on YouTube or on TikTok or on Instagram, we do all these starter stream shows. We were talking about Darrell Henderson's the move. Okay, Sean McVay alluded to the fact that he was going to lean on Darrell Henderson. We know that Zach Evans is not good at football. So all the moon, the stars, the clouds, everything was aligning in the sky for Darrell Henderson to be the workhorse. In fact, Royce Freeman got more carries than I even expected. And yet still, because he got the touchdown, Darrell Henderson's the one that delivered for fantasy football. But I don't love them going on the road to Dallas. And he did split the carries evenly with Royce Freeman, so he didn't even get the usage, the relative usage that Emari Demarcado did. So for a bunch of reasons, the fact that Demarcado is clearly the number 1 option and there's no one behind him in Arizona, and they're not trying to win games. So why not just hand the backfield over to this young, unproven guy with juice, right? He clearly wants it, right? He's clearly earned it to surpass Keontae Ingram on the depth chart, a guy that they drafted, would require you to earn it in practice day in, day out. So he's clearly outworking Ingram. He's flashing bigger plays in practice and in games than Ingram. So for that reason, if I'm prioritizing Demarcado versus Henderson, I'm going Demarcado. I'm seeing a lot of Henderson prioritized ahead of Demarcado just because the Rams are a better offense, and we know this guy named Darrell Henderson is a brand name that we know, and we know that McVay likes him. But going on the road to Dallas is just as bad if not worse, than facing the Ravens at home if you're Darrell Henderson. So the situation's very similar. It's a bad situation for both running backs. Bad matchup this week. However, I'm going with a guy with the 80% snap share. I'm going with a guy that actually has the juice. Darrell Henderson is a straight free agent that no one wanted, and the only reason he's in Los Angeles right now is because he knows the system. Right? He's not a difference maker in any way. He's not going to be making plays that other running backs can't make. Again, it was a fairly even carry distribution between Henderson and Royce Freeman. I'm still putting like a 15% bid down. I'm not spending big on any of these guys. I'll go up to 20, 25%, 25, 30% if I really need a running back flex option this week on Demarcado, not with Darrell Henderson. I do not trust Darrell Henderson to deliver from my flex spot this week like I do with Demarcado, getting all those snaps and playing at home. Those are the two best options. Then from there, it goes all the way down to Devin Singletary, just one of these revolving running backs that we like because he does play on an underrated offense and he does command some targets out of the backfield. Singletary somehow outsnapped Dameon Pierce in week 6. He was dropped during the bye, so you can get him for whatever it is, 5%, whatever you think will be enough. Put it down on Devin Singletary. I'd go up to 8% just because I want pieces of this Texans offense. So where we normally say, hey, 5% at most on Singletary because it's the Texans and because Dameon Pierce is not a quality receiver, I go up to 8% of your FAAB on Devin Singletary. However, I prefer Pierre Strong. Pierre Strong is available for at most 5% of your FAAB. If you really want to get him, 5% is going to be plenty. Now, you could probably get him for 2-3%. But this guy got close to 10 carries. And that was after Jerome Ford went down. Now, Jerome Ford's going to be out 1 to 2 weeks per Adam Schefter, the high ankle sprain. Pierre Strong is a satellite back plus running back. When he played for New England last season, he was delivering breakaway runs at the highest breakaway run rate in the NFL, but that's because it was a very small sample. But we know it. He has 4.37 wheels. He is a slick receiver out of the backfield, and Kareem Hunt looks dusty. So there was the sneaky waiver ad for me is Pierre Strong, right? I'm probably going to bid more than my league mates on Demarcado because I like Demarcado and I like the situation better than most. And then I'm going to try to sneak in Pierre Strong, but I'm not dropping Latavius Murray. I'm not dropping Latavius Murray. Don't do it. Do not drop Latavius Murray. They play on Thursday night. Watch him go out and get 12 carries. This is not one of those backfields where you can trust that they're going to feed James Cook anything but. Anything but. It's a short turnaround week. Latavius Murray only had a handful of touches last week. This tells me Thursday Night Football, there's a chance that they even feed Latavius Murray. Again, they're coming off a loss. They're going to try to make some changes. They might blame the running game, even though it's not James Cook's fault. Who knows why? But watch Latavius Murray get a bunch of touches. So stash him before the Thursday night game or keep him stashed. You've already stashed him because I've told you to stash him for 2 weeks in a row. Keep him stashed. Don't drop him. Other stashes, sadly, Kenneth Gainwell, he's now below 40% rostered across fantasy football leagues, but he's a great stash. I mean, if DeAndre Swift misses time, Kenneth Gainwell is like a top 15 running back. Rico Dowdle, same thing, right? And then there's other guys I like because the teams they're on, like Salvon Ahmed as a stash, Tank Bigsby. I like Zamir White just based on his explosiveness. Leonard Fournette's out there. He's going to sign eventually. Every running back besides Leonard Fournette has signed. So Leonard Fournette's time is coming, and Samaje Perine is still a guy to stash, I guess. So that's where we're at. I mean, it was pretty quick. We were able to go from Demarcado and Darrell Henderson, undrafted guys, one guy I'd never heard of, one guy I didn't think would be back in the league, and then we're rounding it out with Samaje Perine. That's why it's not that exciting. But again, There's intrigue. We need to focus on what we're interested in. We need to focus where the intrigue is. And the maximum intrigue player is Pierre Strong. So that's the guy that you need to get. And now we're going to talk about the wide receivers, right? Because there's a bunch of wide receivers that you absolutely need to get. And we'll get into it after this. It has been 2 years since Josh Larkey paved the way for fantasy gamers to start expecting positive returns from pick'em games, specifically underdog pick'ems. And how do you do it? Well, you look at the slate and you find a great shootout or a sneaky shootout. You also look for a shit show game. 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in one game. That's right. You can do it. You can do it. And you can 100x your payout on underdog. Think about week 1. Jets-Bills was a shit show. Did we see the Aaron Rodgers injury coming? No, but we knew the Jets have a good defense. We knew the Bills have a good defense. Why not expect the worst? And the worst is what we got. So if you had gone Dalvin Cook less than, Garrett Wilson less than, Aaron Rodgers less than, Josh Allen less than, Gabriel Davis less than, boom, 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 you can go 6 for 6. Same thing in week 2. Oh, week 2. Oh, sneaky shootout there in Philadelphia. Minnesota's going to be in comeback mode, so we'll go Cousins, Jefferson, Hawkinson, more than. Madison, less than. But also, Swift, more than. Boom, 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 boom. That's how you do it with the underdog pick'ems, and you use promo code Underworld to get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. You put in $100, Underdog matches that deposit up to $100 with promo code Underworld. Go start picking. This is a pretty sexy group of wide receivers available on the waiver wire. We had Josh Downs prioritized last week. Why? Gardner Minshew. And what did Gardner Minshew do? 300 yards on only 25 attempts against the Browns. Maybe actually, we're thinking, well, Kenny Pickett's not Kenny Pickett. Maybe Jordan loves Kenny Pickett. No. Just kidding. There's no way Jordan loves Kenny Pickett. Well, Sam Howell. Sam Howell looks like the player we wanted Kenny Pickett to be. Now it's looking like Gardner Minshew. Maybe that's the real Kenny Pickett. Or maybe at some point later in the season, Kenny Pickett will be Kenny Pickett. We'll see. But we go from the third priority guy to pick up to the second priority wide receiver to pick up to the first priority wide receiver to pick up. Go back through time and see all of these, the top FAAB bids at the wide receiver position. It's funny. It's a funny thing to see because and it's on Patreon, patreon.com/podfather, patreon.com/podfather. We're putting out multiple shows per day. And everyone's like, how do you do it? How does this player profiler media ecosystem continue to crank such comprehensive shows, in-depth analysis, day in, day out? And the answer is Patreon. Our patrons make this possible. So go to patreon.com/podfather. That's how you support the show. Or if you can't do that, let's say you're watching on YouTube, just hit the like button, right? Or if you're listening to a podcast, rate the show, right? Rate the show in the podcast app. Smash the like button. Please, everybody in the chat right now, you're live chatting, we're talking, we're doing great. Hit the like button, right? And the final frontier of support would be to go to Patreon, patreon.com/podfather, and you can go see the FAAB guidance that I've given week in, week out, and just pay special attention to the wide receivers. We're not outbidding most of our competitors that are thirsty for wide receivers on every guy. But the beauty is you're going to get the right players anyway, because oftentimes the guys that we're prioritizing are not who your league mates are prioritizing. And there's a couple guys this week that fall into that category. Now, if you go back last week, our top priority was Rashee Rice. And then, which is typical, the next week, that player is then greater than 50% owned, and then he's no longer qualifying for the waiver wired show or the Waiver Wired post on Patreon, Rashee Rice took some time. We had Rashee Rice posted up as the primary number one priority wide receiver to scoop off the waiver wire for about 3 weeks before he finally hit that 50% rostered threshold. But then who was right below Rashee Rice last week? Josh Downs. And my notes on Josh Downs are the same every week. Let me read them. Good player, consistent producer, Gardner Minshew. That's it. He's the clear number 2 on a team that has to throw the ball to win games. They do not have a quality defense. In fact, they have the best weakness of all. If you're picking up a wide receiver, you want to pick up a wide receiver on teams with a weak secondary. That was the case for streaming Curtis Samuel. Like every week, pick up Curtis Samuel, stream Curtis Samuel, pick up and stream Sam Howell. Why? One of the reasons? Washington's secondary propels their opponents, and then therefore then you have to throw. Like if your secondary is below average, you're forced into more throwing situations. And that's what we're finding with the Colts. And Josh Downs went over 100 yards, was the target leader. It's going to be Michael Pittman most weeks, depending on the matchup. Sometimes Josh Downs will be the target leader, but he's a clear beta receiver. But it's Devontae Smith without the draft capital and the name recognition, right? It's Devontae Smith without the brand. That's what Josh Downs is. And you look up and they have similar fantasy production where you're like, oh, Josh Downs outproducing Devontae Smith. Yeah. Because the Colts need to throw more than the Eagles do. And otherwise, Josh Downs playing the same role. And they're very similar players. Undersized, great route runners, great hands, just right place, right time. Fundamentally sound football player. That's Josh Downs. After Josh Downs, it's just a pure target play, right? If you're streaming wide receiver, if you need wide receiver, this is a make or break week for a lot of fantasy gamers. It's either I put myself in playoff contention this week or I'm out. A lot of people are facing that right now. So if that's the case, permission to go up, to ratchet it up on Kendrick Bourne. 18 targets the last 2 weeks. He's just who's left, right? The team refused to invest their draft capital in quality wide receivers, right? They could have had George Pickens, but instead they drafted Tyquan Thornton because, we need a field stretcher. Even though field stretchers are widely available late in the draft. They're widely available in free agency. But no. DJ Chark signed what? A $5 million, $8 million deal, depending on how much guaranteed you want to count. You don't need to burn an early second-round pick when you could have a proper alpha guy to carry your passing game in George Pickens. Made no sense. So they're left with Kendrick Bourne as all that's left, the de facto number 1. 18 targets the last 2 weeks. But what matters? Miami. So they'll be playing Miami. This could be a shootout. 47-point total. So it's not a typical Miami 52-plus point total game because it's the Patriots, and they're going to run the ball, and they're an inefficient offense. But if there was a week to play Kendrick Bourne, it's this week. So this is the one time, I'll let you ask me about my affairs. One time, Kay. You want to bid big on a wide receiver, it's Kendrick Bourne, and it's this week. And then, but if you're not in it to win it this week, picking up a wide receiver off the waiver wire, then it's Josh Downs, right? But it's close, right? If you're more focused on this week, Bourne. If you're more focused on just a reliable option for the rest of the season, it's got to be Josh Downs. But after that, right there, it's Jayden Reed, right? So Jayden Reed is the Pierre Strong of wide receivers this week, where the public's not yet on board with Jayden Reed. They haven't seen enough, only 4 targets. But Christian Watson sustains a multi-week injury. Jayden Reed is now the best receiver on this team. Most people believe that's Romeo Doubs. They're wrong. So you get Jordan Reed at value. You can get him 3-4% of your FAAB budget. Easily lock in Jayden Reed. So this is what we've been doing, right? It's been that third guy that's been forgotten about on our list of priorities, where that was Rashee Rice a few weeks back, and then it was Josh Downs, and now it's Jayden Reed. I can promise you what's going to happen is that next week Jayden Reed will be top of the list, right? And then we're just going to keep cycling through this. And then most of us are like, hey, I already have Rashee Rice. I can't fit yet more of these sneaky wide receivers the Podfather like, especially rookies that are about to break out. Sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean to. What can I say? I loaded your team up with quality receivers for free. Sorry. Really sorry. Rashid Shaheed starting to take over for Michael Thomas. Not necessarily Michael Thomas's route tree or even snaps, but the targets, right? The weeks are going by and Michael Thomas is losing his ability to command targets, and they're shifting to Rashid Shaheed. Also, as Derek Carr continues to push the ball downfield inefficiently, the shoulder's getting healthier, Rashid Shaheed commanding more targets. He's a big play downfield receiver. He was another one that was available on day 3 if Bill Belichick knew what he was doing. So I like Jayden Reed, Rashid Shaheed, like 3% of your FAAB budget on those guys. That's the move. That's the move this week. As you're just trying to hold your money back, hold your FAAB budget, hold it back, right? You don't want to use your number 1 waiver claim. Understood, right? Don't do it. But you can wait till waivers run a lot of times and then go ahead and scoop a guy like Rashid Shaheed or especially Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed, Rashid Shaheed, they rhyme. You love it. You got to love it. Yeah, there's more. You think that's it? No, there's more. There's more. There's Michael Wilson, still available. He's now locked in as the number 2, and Murray's about to return. He's there every week. Anytime you want to pick him up, pick him up. But Murray's about to return. So pretty soon, he's going to be one of those guys where the rope is slipping through your hands. And, I didn't get Wilson. And I understand your stockpile, and you don't have room for him. But I want to be on record saying, get Michael Wilson. He is a true alpha, right? So he's not going to be the target leader because that's the incumbent. That's Marquise Brown. Michael Wilson is a rookie. But in a normal sort of offensive configuration, if they were operating in a full meritocracy, it would be Michael Wilson at X, and it would be Marquise Brown at Z, and then Michael Wilson would be getting the targets. It would be Michael Wilson in the Michael Pittman role, and it would be Marquise Brown in the Josh Downs role. If we're operating in a meritocracy, that's what we would see. But the NFL is not a meritocracy, as we all know. Although, sometimes it is. Like in Detroit, where they just refuse to, fully leverage, open up, utilize Jameson Williams. And they're saying, hey, Jameson, why don't you prove it? We'll send you 6 targets, and then you let us know, right? You let us know with your play if you deserve more. And he's like, okay, sure. And then what happens? 0 catches on 6 targets. So Jameson Williams is a flaming bust. I mean, just an inferno of a bust, right? Smoke can be seen from miles, okay? However, Jameson Williams does have 4-3 wheels. Jameson Williams is still a Lion, and this is a prolific offense. And, Jameson Williams, he's a first-round pick. I mean, it's like at some point you call the bottom. 0 for 6, most likely the bottom on Jameson Williams. I like that as a stash. I want to be right 2 ways on Jameson Williams. It's officially time to stash him. Just darkest before the dawn, right? Unless your sun is supernovaed, and then it's just dark always. Jauan Jennings. Jauan Jennings is also worth a stash. He's a pure handcuff. There's no guarantee Debo plays next week. 9 targets. Debo or Ayuk misses games. This is a player you can start with some confidence. It's very rare that you have a proper handcuff wide receiver. They come around once a year. This is the guy. This is as close to a handcuff wide receiver as it's going to get. The other guy, and we talked about it on the Top 10 Takeaways show, is Cedric Wilson. Right? Because this is what the Shanahan clan does. Right? They create a narrow target distribution and a very clear depth chart where Waddle is suffering from back spasms. Right behind him is Cedric Wilson. Debo's out. Right behind him is Jauan Jennings. So these are 2 players, Jauan Jennings and Cedric Wilson, that are smart stashes in very deep leagues. If you're in a traditional league, you're not picking up Jauan Jennings because Michael Wilson's there, because Jayden Reed's there. So don't do it. But deep league stash, Jennings and Cedric Wilson. Also, you're stashing Zay Jones in case he gets healthy. I still believe in Wan'Dale Robinson. Darnell Mooney if DJ Moore misses time. Marvin Mims is an injury stash. Trey Palmer is an injury stash. That's it. And then streaming quarterbacks. Gardner Minshew. Are you not impressed? The guy puts up 300 yards against the Browns. The week before that, he had like 50-plus pass attempts. This is what you want from a streaming quarterback, and we know he has quality weapons. He can throw the ball to Pittman. He can throw the ball to Downs. He can throw the ball to Jonathan Taylor. So you like Minshew. The matchup this week is interesting, right? They're at home against the Saints. The Saints have a better run defense than they do a pass defense. Marshawn Lattimore has been one of the most overrated corners in the league the last 5 years. I like it. I love Minshew this week as a streamer. And then Luke Musgrave, right? So we know Christian Watson is hurt, right? So what you could do is actually pick up both Jayden Reed and Luke Musgrave. He only put up like 5 fantasy points last week. Right? Just had 5 targets, put up like 30 yards. Like there's no reason when someone's sorting the list of tight ends, especially with Kincaid and all these other tight ends, outperforming their weekly average, Musgrave gets lost in that shuffle. Meanwhile, he actually was one of the target leaders on the Packers. There was like a 5-way tie with 5 targets. One of them with Luke Musgrave is going to be a great beneficiary. He and Reed will be the great beneficiaries of the law of the conservation of targets and the loss of Christian Watson. And Luke Musgrave is a stud. Okay, Luke Musgrave runs a 4.6. He's got a 114.4, 94th percentile speed score, and an 87th percentile burst score on Player Profiler. But he's 6'6", 255, a great blocker. If someone from this rookie tight end class is going to be the next Travis Kelce, it's going to be Luke Musgrave. And we're going to think back and remember when Christian Watson had that injury, and then Musgrave hasn't had it more than 10 fantasy points in any given week. Look at the box scores, right? You go back, 8 fantasy points, 11 fantasy points, 9 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points. No one that's game log watching is going up and grabbing Luke Musgrave, but this is the moment. This is the moment. If you need tight end help, this is the best possible time to get an elite talent that's getting all the snaps. He's running the routes, and you're not allowed to be surprised when Luke Musgrave is the target leader. Well, I'll be surprised because I'm assuming it's going to be Jayden Reed. But if it is Luke Musgrave, I'm not going to be surprised.